32.
Hello, everyone. We'll give it a few more minutes and wait for some more people to come in before we get started.
Do you want to, in addition to having questions at the end, do you want to have people put questions into the chat or no?
Yeah. So we'll go into that. People can put the questions in the Q&A box, and we're gonna go over that here in a second. So everyone can, don't raise their hand throughout the presentation. If you do have questions, wait for the end of the presentation. And you can submit those questions in the Q&A box. You can also put them in the chat box, or you can submit any comments or replies to the presentation in the chat box as well. And feel free to turn on the closed captions and translations as well. And while you guys are still, coming in, I'm going to launch this poll. Just answer this question when you guys get the chance. We'll get started in just a minute or two. Let's go ahead and get started. So again, just some general housekeeping. Don't use the raise your hand feature, and submit any questions you have in the Q&A box or the chat box, and we'll get to those questions at the end of the presentation. Okay, I'm going to let my colleague David introduce himself.
Hello, everybody. My name is David Merson. I've been with Ingenious now for 4 years. This will be my 5th admission cycle. Before working with Ingenious, I worked with Brown University admission office. That's also where I went undergraduate and earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in history and biomedical ethics. After that, I went to Cornell Law School, and I worked as a military attorney in the Navy for a while, and then practiced law in both public and private sector, and then transitioned to higher education about 12 years ago. And then before I worked for Brown, I worked for various colleges in the Boston area, which is where I'm from, and doing career advising, academic advising, and admission advising. And I've worked with a very wide range of students, obviously students who are interested in the STEM disciplines, but also students interested in social sciences and humanities, and students that have gone to through Ingenious to large research universities, to small liberal arts colleges, engineering and technical schools, and everything in between. So broad range of experience, definitely a lot of experience with students interested in the science, engineering, and math, for sure.
Awesome. Thanks, David. So my name is Jillian Shank. I am an enrollment counselor as well as a marketing and business development associate here at Ingenious Prep. I got my undergraduate degree at the Indiana University at the Kelley School of Business. And part of my job is to bring you guys value and to tell you a little bit about Ingenious Prep and how we work and how we can help you. So next, we'll, get into the brief introduction of who we are and what we do. So we are a college counseling company based out of New Haven, Connecticut, but we have team members placed all over the world, and we are very lucky to work with former admissions officers and graduate coaches and other academic mentors that come from the top universities in the entire world. So here are some of our former admissions officers. You can see the faces here, like my colleague David. We do work with over 150 former admissions officers from top universities across the country. And then we also work with over 75 graduate coaches from top schools, as you can see some on the slide here. And then we also work with over 75 professors, scholars, and researchers and business leaders from top universities to provide internships and mentorships to students. Okay, now briefly we'll go over a little bit about our curriculum and who we are. With our curriculum, we have objective insights of over 50,000 plus data points and over 150 variables that have been analyzed by our team of Stanford, Caltech, and MIT statisticians. Our cutting edge curriculum was built by our team of former admissions officers to provide strategic insights and to every top 30 university and more. We use a systematic and operational curriculum that's used to train and manage our counseling team and is consistently updated with the latest trends of the admissions offices. And finally, a little bit about our results. So we have incredible results. So far this cycle, we've had 32 Ivy League offers, 38 top 10 offers, 115 top 30 offers, 206 top 50 offers, 299 top 100 offers, and 33% of students admitted to their early decision school. So you can see we have incredible results, and we've definitely been able to help students guide them through the college admissions process. And if you have any questions or want to learn more about how we do work with students, feel free to shoot me an email. My email is down at the bottom of the slides. So feel free to email me and reach out directly, and I'll definitely be happy to help. Okay, awesome. So before we get started and before we dive into the good stuff, if you could please put in the chat a little bit about kind of what you need the most help with right now, that would be super helpful. So go ahead and just throw that up in the chat. Okay. Now we'll briefly get into STEM admissions data and how applications are processed. So let's go over some STEM admissions data. So what percentage of college applicants do you think apply as prospective STEM majors? If you had to say A, 20.7%, B, 26.3%, C, 30.4%, D, 39.2%, or E, none of the above. Go ahead and put your answer that you think in the chat box. So the answer to that is actually D, 39.2%. So over 1/3 of college applicants apply with an interest in STEM. So this is a very competitive field, and thousands of students are pursuing this field, and this applicant pool is very, very competitive. Okay. Now here's another fun trivia question. What do you guys think the acceptance rate is for Brown's program in liberal medical education, Brown's PLME program? If you had to guess, go ahead and throw your answer in the chat box again. Looks like you guys are on track. So the answer is actually A. So less than 4% of applicants are admitted to Brown's BSMD program. Compare this to Brown's overall acceptance rate of 6.6%. So this is a very competitive program. So the major takeaway here is that STEM fields are incredibly popular and competitive in the admissions process. And in order to get admitted as a STEM student, it is essential to stand out. So now we're going to kind of touch base on how applications are processed and what that process actually looks like behind the scenes. So first you submit your application, and then the admissions office would add it to their pile of thousands of applications. The applications are separated and divided, and they're often divided by region. So that means that actually your competitors are really the people in your region. Then each admissions officer gets a pile of applications. That admissions officer then reviews all the applications in their pile, and they select a handful of applicants they want to accept. When that admissions officer selects those applicants, they actually have to advocate for them at committee. So all the admissions officers meet as a committee and debate whether to admit the selected applicants. So the admissions officer who's reading your application actually has to want you to get into that school, so much that they advocate for you at committee. So it definitely has to make an impression on them for them to want to advocate for you to get into that university. So here are the major takeaways here. One, your application will be approximately 13 pages, and it will be in a stack of applications as tall as a 20-story building. Two, you are compared to other applicants for your region, so that is your competition and definitely something to keep in mind. And three, it is still key to make an impression on the admissions officer assigned to your file so that he or she will advocate for you in admissions committee. As I mentioned, you really have to make that impression and you really have to stand out to get to that committee phase. So those are the major takeaways, and I'm going to let my colleague David take it from here to talk to you guys about strategizing your application and building up your profile.
Okay. Yeah. Next one, please. So I'm not going to be reading through a lot of the slides. I'm going to be more or less making comments on them. So as Jillian said, if you do have questions, we will address those at the end, and you can also put them in the chat box. But first initial questions are what probably a lot of you know. What are some good colleges for STEM, and how should you conduct research for these schools? These are some things that you can look at more closely as far as what's considered in the admission decision. You will read probably many, many times through this process that the decision is holistic. There is not one part of the pie that is more important than the other. They're all equally important. The admissions office will read all the applications. They do not have a formula or an algorithm or a cutoff or anything. So all of these will be considered as part of the application. Strengths of the curriculum, the courses, your standardized testing, the rigor of your courses overall. When you're looking to build your school list, it's a portfolio. You want to have it balanced. You want to make sure that you have what we call reach, target, and safety options. Pretty much, top 10, 15 schools are reach for everybody because they could fill their classes with top students multiple times. So you want to make sure that you have a balance of schools, and how do you figure that out? Median test scores are one way you can look at. Are you at the median or above? If so, then that's probably going to be like a target school for you. If the acceptance rates are in the 30s and 40%, that could potentially be a target school for you, or maybe a safety. But schools that have below 10% acceptance rates, these are always going to be reach schools for you. And if you are interested in STEM, which we assume if you're in this presentation, then you would also want to find out what percentage of students are applying to STEM disciplines at that school in order to help build your list. Some of these are obvious, I think. MIT, Caltech, Georgia Tech, Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, UC Berkeley. Those are always in the top groupings for the hard sciences. Johns Hopkins, overall great in sciences, often, as you may know, biological sciences are quite strong there, and Yale has great research. It's a great research university, as well as being a great university in all of the science fields. But each of these have their own different personalities. So as part of your research, you want to have a better understanding of what these schools look for, because they're not all the same. Liberal arts schools or smaller schools, typically with populations 2,000, 2,200 or less. Harvey Mudd is really unusual in that it's really a STEM focused school, but it's liberal arts. It's in the Claremont College schools in California. So it's among a consortium of schools. Many of these other schools also have strong sciences and also very, very small classroom sizes. So, and one benefit of going to these schools is you get a lot of attention from your professors because the classes are quite small. Those schools that do undergraduate research, you'll be an important part of that. You're not going to be lost in the shuffle for many of these smaller schools. Not a huge difference in the list here. You can see another one. I don't know if it's on the next slide. Purdue is another one, which is one of my favorites, but there's definitely some engineering programs on here that are the same as the prior slide, but we also see Cornell show up here. One thing I do want to point out is that overall rankings, if rankings are important to you, don't always match the rankings for the major or the discipline. So for example, Purdue, which I just mentioned, super strong in engineering, has been historically strong in engineering, is also a very good school, but their engineering department is quite good. You'll see on here, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. The admission rate for that overall might be pretty high, like over 50%, but for computer science, it's only about 6%. So as a result, its computer science department is really quite strong and highly ranked. So another thing to consider when you're doing your research is not only the overall acceptance rate, but the acceptance rate for those majors if it's known. Pre-med, I think my sort of rule of thumb, I mean, clearly schools like Bowdoin that have very strong sciences and are small, prepare students well for careers in medicine and medical school. So this is not to say that the liberal arts colleges aren't top ranked and excellent choices, because they have really outstanding records for sending students to all graduate schools. But I think you will notice that the schools that have, the universities that have medical schools typically have very strong pre-med programs. Brown University, for instance, we talked about their PLME program, which is very Brunonian and specific to them, but they have very strong public health. So therefore, the undergraduate public health is very strong. So that's something to look at too when you're looking at universities. So one thing is you're going through the application process. Oh, well, this is true or false. So there's the question. So you pick true or false. Is this true or false? And I'll make a statement about it for the next slide. It seems to have a lot of agreement here. Yeah, so it's important to realize that when you are choosing schools within a university, University of Southern California, Cornell University, others, they will give you additional or different supplemental essays than if you're applying to a different college. And that's just sort of generally true also, that you can find that there may be different supplemental questions depending on what you're applying to. Not true of all schools, but it definitely does happen. So next slide. Here's two examples from Yale and Princeton. Should you have, if you were to choose an engineering discipline. So you will have to answer all the other questions in addition to these ones that are specific to engineering. So really, there's going to be hundreds of colleges to choose from, depending on what you're interested within STEM. And that's a big part of my job. It's a big part of our job, is to help you not only make a balanced list, but also to find those that are going to be the best fit for who you are. I can tell you from my own experience working with Brown and also working with my colleagues, that it is not unusual for a top school, like an Ivy League school, to reject a candidate because they do not believe that that student is a good fit, and or that they're not going to go to that school, regardless of your stats, of your background. So it's important to have a sensible list in that way. So one thing that we do, we spend a lot of time doing, is helping to build your profile over time, because if you want to be attractive, as Jillian said, to that admission officer, they will advocate for you. If you want your application to stand out and you also want to demonstrate that you're a good fit for that school, you want to build your profile. So one of the important things that you want to do is you want to be able to be knowledgeable about the field that you're in. So for example, doing reading in professional or quasi-professional. When I say quasi-professional, it could be like popular science or popular mechanics. You're doing regular reading in the field. You're watching current documentaries, YouTubes, podcasts, because you want to be knowledgeable about what's going on. It will show in your essays. And also it will be a way for you to demonstrate your interest in the field. And just through your own activities, you will also be able to demonstrate that you are educating yourself, you're becoming more knowledgeable, and you also have a commitment to that particular discipline, whatever that might be. So research is always important. It's probably one of the most important parts of your extracurricular activities. It can be just about in any topic that you want to do it in, and it can be something that is wholly new for you or something that is already ongoing, meaning like you don't always have to do completely independent research work. Any research that you do can also be part of guided research with a professor, which is something we do at Ingenious, or just even through your high school. There are often like biology clubs and science clubs that have shared research projects and shared, journal exploration together, things like that. So in addition to build your profile, there's, these are some examples of things that you can do. Summer programs are definitely important. They're not the be all and end all. I think that there is a kind of growing belief that if you don't do certain summer programs, that you're not going to be as competitive. The advantage of the summer programs is that they're prepackaged. So if you've ever taken a prepackaged vacation before, it's great because you don't have to think about like all the things that you need to do, the flights, the hotels, the food. These are prepackaged programs. Many of them are highly regarded, but that doesn't mean that you have to do those type of things. There's certainly, I've seen students just through their own outreach find really great opportunities working at, like we have here, number 3, local university lab or professor, or independently apply to programs that their high schools sponsors, and volunteer work that makes sense for your community. Volunteer work, like by and large, is local. So, where you live will influence like what opportunities you have, but many students do find places to volunteer locally. I have a student now, for example, that's volunteering at the Mystic Aquarium in Mystic, Connecticut, because that's where she lives and she's interested in biology. So she's getting firsthand experience as a student volunteer working at the aquarium. And anything that you can create that shows that you have done, research and work on your own, whether it's through publication or otherwise, something similar, presentation. These are always excellent ways to demonstrate what you've accomplished. Here's some examples of what students have done in the past based on what their interests are. And a lot of times they make interesting essays too. I had a student that was interested in engineering and robotics. He was also a junior volunteer firefighter in his town. And he became very interested in how technology and robotics could be used for fire safety, fire rescue, that type of thing. And that actually turned into a very, very interesting essay. So I think he really stood out. So a lot of the ideas that you have don't just show up on your application as I've done this activity or I've done this project, but they also can be experiences that you have that really make you unique. So there's never too early to get started with building your profile, and it's never too late. I would say it's a shaping process, meaning like usually early on in your high school career, you have the leeway to do all kinds of different things, and they don't necessarily all need to be related to each other. As we get closer to the application season, which is more or less now, June, July, August, for those that are going to be rising seniors, then we try to find more specific projects or focus within things that you're doing with your research or your independent work that more closely connect to your expected majors. But it's a building process, so you need to lay the foundation and build it up from there. So I guess this is the do's and don'ts of approaching application components. Okay. What's the approach and what does it look like? This is particular to PLME. For those of you that don't know what PLME is, Brown's, it's a combination degree, so Bachelor of Science and Medical degree, and it's attractive to a lot of students because you're accepted to medical school, so you don't have to go through the process of applying to and being accepted to medical school. Brown's is very unique because they do not, I repeat, do not want you to major in biomedical related field as an undergraduate. So the reason it's so challenging is you must demonstrate that you would be successful as a philosophy major at Brown, or you would be successful as an art history major concentration, what they call it, at Brown. And you're also qualified to go to medical school. So it's really quite unusual. But I think the purpose of having this quotation is to show that independent thinking and projects and research and doing outside work is definitely important to be competitive at top schools. The do's. I think sometimes there is an impression that you have to funnel everything into one theme, one academic theme. That's not necessarily the case. I think if you are going to be a student interested in applying to these schools like Yale and Stanford and Harvard, they're not going to expect that you have really just one interest. And I've had students, I had a student go to University of Chicago, for example, whose two main interests were music and chemistry. And they don't necessarily have to be related to each other. And that's certainly appreciated because that diversity and that way of thinking about problems and issues from different perspectives is definitely highly valued. If you can find ways to combine them, then that may be a creative way to approach what your plan is for that school. And it also can be a way for you to create a very interesting mix of activities that together show that you're multi-talented, but also through your supplemental essays, you'll be able to show that you're quite a unique candidate. I will say that reading applications that are all focused on one academic area, one topic, are very boring and dry to read. And it's nice to see some variety in a student as far as their academics goes. These are not all ands. These can be ors, as I talked about with summer programs. There are competitive summer programs that you can do. That doesn't mean that's the only thing you can do. There's, since I was in high school, leadership in school clubs is important, but it's, again, not a must-have for that. Competitions, including like science fairs through ISIF or otherwise, as we mentioned a few times, doing independent research and internships. These are all good steps that you can take or things that you can address, but not all of these are going to be available to you. Like, it depends on what are your high school resources. What are you able to do for your particular field? Like, for example, math has a lot of competitions. And so you can find a lot of competitions, but then when you go and look for competitions in some other areas like chemistry, there may not be very many. So admissions officers understand that. They don't expect you to invent things out of thin air that aren't there. And you will be compared to those in your high school in your region. So if they have the same, limitations and resources, then that's completely understood. Here's some examples of things that you can do that are, I would say, like hands-on, like meaning you can do them from your own house, your own resources. You don't necessarily need to have a fancy lab or a fancy internship, but you can just do them yourself and find ways to share what you've learned and what you are learning with others through different types of media or different means. Next. I would say I would qualify this. So again, oh, it's true false again. So let's do the true false. I have to really remember that it's true false. This is, I wouldn't say it's a trick question, but it's the way it's asked that makes it a little bit tricky. We can go to the answer. The reality is that if you participate in a competition, but you don't get a result from it, it's like it almost didn't happen. It's kind of like if you studied for an AP exam outside of your high school curriculum and you took it and you got like a 3 and you didn't want to report it. It's like it never happened. Now, I have had students that have participated in competitions and then they write about it as part of like teamwork or experiences that they've had or how they became interested in the subject. So it's not valueless, but you don't list competitions that you don't win awards and prizes. So in that sense, it doesn't have value. Here's some don'ts. So the first point about avoiding repetition, I think this also relates to what I was saying about trying not to be one-dimensional. I had a student that, excellent student, excellent record, but she insisted on always writing about what her academic and her research interests were in almost every part of the application. And that really kind of undermined it because it made her seem one-dimensional when she really wasn't. Also, for activities that are very common, like that we know are very common because many students have them, they don't necessarily even need to be included. I think the ideal situation is in the Common Application, you have space for 10 strong activities. The best students have more than 10. So there are going to be some that do not appear on that list of 10. And those could be things you did early in high school, but they can also be things that are very common. So it's not something that you want to rely on for the most competitive schools. And you want to give yourself plenty of options, like we talked about with a balanced school list and looking for schools that have strong departments in the areas that you're interested in and not necessarily rely just on the rankings, which have proven to be not very reliable anyway. So here's an example of some things that are pretty common. When I was working with Brown University, could they fill their class with students that have 1,600 on their SATs? Yes. Do they? No. So, there are some things that are common and can be helpful, but you're not going to want to necessarily emphasize them or rely on them or assume that they have, more value than they actually do. Here's some more. Not to pick on math, but there are a lot of math competitions out there. This is just a profile of a student in the past, student S. Background, you can see they have very strong ACT score. For those of you not as familiar with ACT, 35 is excellent. 35 or 36 is as high as you can get. A weighted grade that high is quite good. That would indicate the student probably has all A's, maybe many advanced placement courses. So that's very strong. And then neuroscience and biology is an area of interest. So one thing that we pay attention to is neuroscience and biology are very competitive. They're not as competitive as something like computer science, but they're right up there. So one of the things that we try to do is we try to find adjacent or similar majors to those to see where the student has genuine interest in those, because if they're able to apply in those like areas or those majors, it may make them a more competitive candidate for the top schools. So extracurricular enhancement, one thing we try to do is we try to find something that the student is really, passionate is an overused word, but that they're really passionate about, but really something that is not hard work for them, that it's fun. So for this student, food and cooking was really important to them. It was something that they enjoyed. So doing something like this particular type of project would be something that they were likely to work on and to make progress on and to do things with. And that's important, because you don't want to start things that you're not really engaged in and then they kind of die on the vine. So as I mentioned, a lot of what we do early on is to build sort of the framework or the fundamentals for some of the activities and then build on them over time. We have our own counselors will guide students to help them build it and give them ideas and support. We also have very specific programs built into our curriculum that are designed to enhance these type of very specific projects as well. So one thing that we try to do is, I mentioned, it's nice to have students that have diverse academic interests, and we apply that also to activities. Now, I definitely am someone that's biased towards students that have diversity in their activities. Other former admission officers may not have the same bias that I do, but in this case, I think it's really nice that the student has a music interest that they can build on as well, and they can approach it in a creative way so that when it appears on their activities list, it's not, I'm interested in cooking as a hobby, I play the piano, but it's more than that. And so we try to find those natural interests and build on those, whether it's a blog, a website, etc. In this case, we're able to tie the activities back to the academic interest. That's not always necessary. It's nice because in the application, we do try to create a consistent persona or theme throughout it. So if it does connect back to the academic interest, that is nice. Not always possible, but it is something that we do consider through the process of building the profile, because then when we get to the end, the admission officer will read the application and they'll have a very good sense of what the student is all about. Whether that's just through the essays and the activities list, or even for schools that have more than that, like videos, for example. So one of the things we start working on early is to help the student figure out like what it is that they need to focus on. One thing I'm working on now are basically strategy for students to how they're going to approach the application counseling process and how they're going to invest their time and what they need to work on, and where they have things taken care of and things that they need to continue to work on over the next few months. So we do help the student in the planning part of it, whether it's through timelines, clear expectations about what they need to do, specific assignments. It's a very structured process. You can see in the middle here, the middle bullet point, I referred previously to application persona. For this student, this is the application persona that we developed. Future science investigating using communications tool to promote medical knowledge. This is not something we write in the application. This is not something that is printed on the student's resume or somewhere in there, but it is a background theme to the application. And we are always questioning ourselves, like, how does this connect to this persona? Because as we saw in the beginning of the presentation, the admission officers are reading hundreds, thousands of applications, and they have to get a sense of the person very quickly. 10, 11, 12 minutes might be the amount of time that they have to review your application. So they want to be able to get that sense of who this person is, and having a consistent theme that things tie into, the different components tie into, helps the admission officer digest it and think about who that person is and why they would be a good fit for that particular college. Here's a list of some, which would all be reach schools for anybody, but here's a list of some colleges this particular student was interested in. And some of them were maybe a particularly good fit because they combined the diverse interests of this student. So, based on our advice, we identified Yale as one that would be a really, really good fit for this particular student. And we helped to, the application persona and the way the application was written, all the different components of it would support the student in a way that would be attractive to a Yale admission officer. And here's some example of how we really refine the activities list. So I think the initial impression is for students to work on the common application when they're completing the activities honors list, that it's a list. You write it and there it is and there you go. But it's actually an art, the way it's described, the way the descriptions read, the way it's ordered, how the different parts to it connect to each other. First and foremost, you want it to be easily read, because it has to be read quickly. You want it to be very concrete and factual and quantitative, so that the admission officer has a true sense of what the student accomplished. So this is a lot of work that we put into it. To all the work that the student did in high school, all the activities they did, gets reduced down to just a couple pages to this activities honors list and maybe another section. So we want to respect that and reflect that well in how we approach it. You can see these are some excerpts from the activities list. You can see, as I said, very quantitative. You'll see a lot of quantitative numbers in here about what exactly the student did, how often, how many. So it's very specific. It's important to make sure that the research, the publications, professional presentations, things like that are represented well. And in this case, the student did have a lot of research background. So we will typically but use the additional information section, which can be used for anything, but we typically will use that for this purpose, to highlight research, publications, professional activities. You can see this is the additional information section, publications and presentations. So it's like a portion of a CV, basically. Moving on to personal statement. One thing that we try to do is to make the personal statement personal. There are questions that are specifically about your activities or about your academic interests. We don't want to be repetitive and talk about your participation in a certain club when that may not add that much personality to the application. So we definitely want to use that space so the admission officer becomes familiar with that student as a person, not just as an academic student, but what is that student going to be like when they show up here? So as an admission officer, when I would read personal statements, I would be thinking like, what kind of person is this going to be in the classroom as a classmate, as a roommate, as a teammate, as a lab mate, as someone who's on the campus community. So having those aspects of the person in the personal statement, I think are definitely important. Certainly, there's a lot of drafts, a lot of revisions that go into the personal statement. We work through it very carefully at a very detailed level to try to get the most out of it. We have 650 words, and we try to get the most out of every sentence, since that's really not that much space. There is certain little writing tricks that we can use to help the personal statement be more effective, but so that it reflects the students' personality, their values, moments in their life when they've been introspective or had a realization. All of these things, we want to make sure that the personal statement captures those. So we do spend quite a bit of time on it. And then this is a little excerpt from the student. Now, one thing I want to emphasize here is, again, this student is very accomplished in their scientific research, but you're not going to find anything about scientific research in the personal statement. You're not going to find out about some competition they're in or some publication they worked on. Like, none of that is in here. It's really something that is their own personal story. Supplemental essays are your opportunity to demonstrate to the admission officer that you understand what that school is all about, and why you want to study a certain topic at that school in particular. Often when I have conversations with students about what schools they're interested in, they might say something like, well, I'm interested in Brown and Columbia. And I will say, Brown and Columbia are complete opposites. It's like a watermelon and a chicken. They're like not similar at all. So that doesn't mean you can't apply to Brown and Columbia, but you're really going to have to understand like why you're a good fit at those very, very different schools. So the supplemental essays are more than just taking a boilerplate that you wrote once for one school and substituting the name of the other school in there. It really has to be tailored to that school, because you have to make a convincing case why that school wants you there and why you're a good fit there and how you've really thought about their academic programs make the most sense for you. So there's just some, general goals that were for the supplemental essays, but this is the short answer. These were the acceptances for this particular student. Pretty good, right? So that's pretty good. So so that was just a profile of one of our recent students. So these are what we do. With the question, well, what is exactly you do? You can see the programs on the left. Candidacy building, that's the profile building, development from any point that we pick up with you to the end. Academic mentorships is something that we're expertise in. These are guided, they're like college seminars with guided study and investigation on a particular topic with a professor, a college professor. Many students use our academic mentorships to reinforce and discover more about topics that they're interested in, and many, this is where they get their first start on a research publication. Leadership and Innovation Lab is also a very unique program for us, which is something that I was talking about, where we can help you take an activity and make it into something more dynamic and more interesting, like the student we looked at with food and cooking, and this became more than just a hobby. The last one, application counseling, is the core of what we do with the rising seniors from the summer into the fall. And that's includes like all the application components, supplemental essay, the school research, the supplemental essays, the personal statement, the activities and honors list. That's where all the application counseling comes into play. And AZ Futures, which is just above that, you can see the description there. Basically preparation for those particular competitions. So it's a one chart overview.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. Please feel free to reach out to me if you are interested in scheduling a consultation. I'm definitely happy to tell you a bit about our packages and services and answer any questions that you have. I am going to launch this poll here to see if you are interested in that free consultation. And also, I just want to let all seniors know that we are offering a special promotion. So feel free to get in touch with me before the 19th. And I'm definitely happy to tell you, details of this promotion on a call as well. So yeah, feel free to touch base if you are interested. Now we'll kind of open up the floor for Q&A and answer those questions. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to throw them in the Q&A box. It looks like we have quite a few questions in both the chat box and the Q&A box. So I'll start filtering through and we can begin the Q&A session. One question I read from earlier was, how do you recommend standing out? How do you recommend standing out if you are interested in a STEM field and you go to a top STEM high school? So how to stand out in that very competitive STEM environment?
I think an interdisciplinary approach might be one way to look at it. Sometimes also everyday challenges or everyday issues are, we saw a couple examples of that. I think that as far as interdisciplinary goes, if you're in a very strong STEM high school, then you may have another interest in art or history or something like that. And there's a lot of things that you can do combining interests. And again, it's not necessary to do that, but if you're trying to distinguish yourself from your classmates, that could be one way to do it. And I've had students do all kinds of interesting projects that combine, those type of interests, a hard science field with an art or a humanity or social science.
Awesome. That's super helpful. And then another student asked if you should do research in the major you want to pursue, or can you do research in another field entirely, or, how to make that decision about what to do research on.
It's obviously something that we help you with and give you guidance with. I think that if you were to say, I'm interested in chemistry, we would dig more into, okay, well, what is it about chemistry that interests you? What do you see yourself doing with chemistry? Do you see yourself making products? Do you see yourself being involved in academics? Do you see yourself doing something else? Do you see it connected to another field like biochemistry or computational chemistry? So just in what you would ever mention as your main idea or main interest, we would explore that. But the other ones that you may be interested in too, sort of the same thing. Like, I'm interested in chemistry, but I'm also interested in creative writing. Okay, well, what is it? What do you like doing creative writing? Do you like writing poetry, short stories? What do you enjoy reading? So it's like a logical, planned, gradual exploration of those to find a niche, in each of those that's going to work for you.
Awesome. That's super helpful as well. Also, someone was asking as well, how big are the regions behind the scenes of the admissions offices? So, like how we mentioned earlier, they're divided by region. What are the sizes of those regions, and kind of what do you expect when we say that, you're competing against the students in your area?
Yeah, so not to be evasive, but it depends. I was just looking at Syracuse University today, and there was one admission officer that was responsible for South Carolina and Texas. So she was entirely responsible for every student applying from those two states. But then
Got
if you
it.
go to a state like New York, because Syracuse is literally in New York State, they have admission officers that are only responsible for parts of New York City. So the regions can be very different within the United States, or they can be like, if it's international students, it could be one person responsible for all of one whole country or multiple countries. It's really driven by populations, where the population of students that are applying to that college, that's how they will sort out the regions, and then how the admission officers acquire responsibility for certain high schools.
That makes perfect sense. Awesome. Another student was asking what would be pivotal in a STEM recommendation letter from a teacher or counselor, and anything that, they should take in mind as they send out those emails and cover letters to those teachers and counselors.
Yeah, I think you can assume that for top students that teachers, science teachers writing those are going to say that you're a top student. So that, alone is not going to, the verification of that is your grade, right? So what else do you sort of bring to the table? Are you the person that helps classmates, during labs? Are you the kind of person that asks interesting questions during class or after class? Do they find that you're a valuable member within the high school community at large, like outside of their classroom? So a lot of that goes to what is the character of this student beyond how they do their homework and what their test grades are like. Those are really helpful.
That is super helpful. Okay, let's see. I think we have time for about one more. Um, this was something that was asked a few times about research, is where can high schoolers figure out where to publish research or how to make that happen?
There's a few high school journals that we typically recommend that students submit publications, not all of them, but one. So there are a few high school journals that are appropriate for science and sometimes beyond science. So though that's certainly a possibility. A high school journal, it's also a possibility that it's not published per se, like in a journal, online or whatnot, hard copy. But these kind of synergistic activities like presentations. So presenting a paper, a topic at a conference, for instance, is also equally viable.
Awesome. Okay, that's super helpful. I think that's all we have time for tonight. But everyone who asked about the recording will go out tomorrow. So if you missed anything, it will be in the recording. And if you do have any questions, I know we weren't able to get to all of them today, but feel free to reach out to me over email, and I'm definitely happy to answer those questions for you. And we can also set up a time to chat, and I can tell you a little bit more about how we can help you. So feel free to reach out. And thank you so much, David, for your time tonight. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and I hope you have a great rest of your night. Bye, everyone. Have a good one.
Right.